But of course, it starts first with awareness. You have to be aware of how you're feeling so that you then have choices regarding what to do with those emotions.
Exude Human Capital hosts Hold On, Let Me Close My Door, bringing real HR stories from real professionals with real solutions to you. Join us as we navigate the ever-changing workplace with Allison DeFlorio, co-founder and managing partner, Exude Human Capital, and special guests. Welcome, everyone, to episode 7 of Hold On, Let Me Close My Door. I'm Allison DeFlorio, and I'm really excited about today's topic, the emotional or emotionally intelligent leader. When I think about what's happened over the past few years in the world of the workplace, I've seen an uptick in emotions in the workplace, and rightfully so. We've been through a pandemic. We've been through some major social issues that are continuing to create some challenges in the workplace, and there's a lot of polarization. So what all of that leads to is the fact that employees are showing up with a whole different set of emotions than perhaps in the past. And they're no longer told to leave it at the door. They just kind of bring it all there to work. And our leaders are tasked with being able to effectively not only manage those they lead, the emotions of those they lead, but their own emotional responses. So in order to have a conversation about this, I thought, well, who is the best person to tap? And I immediately thought of Michael Brenner. So Mike is joining us today to share his experience and wisdom around emotional intelligence. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you so much, Allison. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
You know, I first met Mike, I think I've lost track. It's got to be almost a decade ago. Would you agree?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were both speakers at an event, and I think you were coming on after, or I was coming on after you, and I was able to catch a portion of your presentation. And for anyone out there who has never seen Michael Brenner present, Michael is at heart a musician. He's also an international leadership consultant and the founder and CEO of the Right Chord Leadership, which is a firm that specializes on talent development. He is an amazing presenter and really has captured the foundation of music and incorporates concepts of music into how leaders can lead. So, Michael, why don't you share a little bit about yourself with our listeners?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Allison. I do remember that exact scenario where you were coming on after me and we had a chance to connect, and here we are all these years later. And thank you so much for having me on your podcast. So I've been in the learning and development space for over 20 years. I was an advertising copywriter before that, and then I really did a 180 pivot into this world of working with leaders and teams and organizations. Although I've been in this line of work for quite some time, I founded Right Chord Leadership in about 2014 or so, and it was a vehicle for me to combine my background and experience as a professional musician for over 35 years with my background and passion for leadership and team development. And so a lot of the language, a lot of the metaphors that one might find in a musical context, I discovered were equally appropriate in an organizational context. And so I use the metaphor of music, particularly my background in jazz, because I think jazz bands are like the ultimate organic team, right? With very fluid team dynamics. And so it's long story short, it's served as a kind of a nice way to, make a brand for myself. And it also allows me to bring all my instruments to my training sessions and my keynote presentations, and that's a lot of fun.
It's so much fun to watch as well. So for any of our listeners out there, he's an amazing sax player and brings not just his sax, but a number of different instruments and incorporates it into his presentation. So Michael, we're really interested in hearing about emotional intelligence. And before we get into kind of our conversation, I wanted to set a little context for the conversation. So if we think about emotional intelligence, you've probably heard different definitions for this, but we're going to think about it as the capacity to be aware of, control, and express one's emotions, and to handle interpersonal relationships judiciously and empathetically. It's managing your own emotions, your responses to others, and facilitating the emotions of others to have productive relationships. There's so much research out there that suggests that emotional intelligence is one of the top 10 most in-demand competencies of leaders. In fact, the Harvard did a couple of studies on this, and they're predicting that the demand for emotional intelligence in leaders will increase by 26% by 2030, which is not that far off. They're also saying it is, without doubt, the most in-demand essential workplace skill. So not just for leaders, but for others in the workplace. Interestingly, one of the studies that they did was in partnership with a large hospitality organization. When you think about that, everyone in a hospitality organization really has to have strong emotional intelligence because you're dealing with the public all the time. A couple of other interesting things that I think is helpful to set context here. Gallup, in a recent poll, suggested that employees with emotionally intelligent managers are 4 times less likely to leave their job, which is pretty astounding for HR people or business owners out there listening. When you do the calculations of what it costs to replace somebody who leaves, and you can increase that by helping your leaders develop stronger emotional intelligence.
Sure.
So that said, I think it's pretty clear that it's important. But Michael, from your experience working with leaders, how would you rate the importance of emotional intelligence to the success of today's leader, and why?
In a nutshell, absolutely, unequivocally essential. Emotional intelligence is not a new concept. As you know, Allison, it's been around for many, many decades. When I first started learning about it, when I got into this field 20 odd years ago, it really resonated with me because here was a different way of thinking about what it means to be intelligent that really has very little to do with traditional definitions of intelligence, book smarts, school smarts, testing smarts, sort of the how well you did on the physics exam or how well you did on the SAT. This is how we've kind of historically measured intelligence. But along came this utterly new concept that had everything to do with what you just described. It had to do not with how well you did on your test or how well you did in school, but how aware you were of your emotions and how adept you were at managing them appropriately. And to make matters even more interesting, not just your own emotions, as you pointed out, but those of others, being aware of the emotions being displayed by those around you. And I think the trickiest part of all this is maybe not being able to control others' emotions as we might control ours, but perhaps influence others in a positive, constructive way, particularly negative emotions. I mean, if we're dealing with positive emotions, that's not too difficult. But the emotions that rise from stress and anxiety and fear, and these are the kinds of emotions that folks often struggle with. not only in terms of managing their own, but also in terms of managing others. So to put a fine point on it, I think that it is as essential now as it ever was, and arguably more essential now, if I can say such a thing, because of the fraught work environment that in which we now find ourselves, largely because of COVID and how we are all trying to navigate our way out of COVID and discover new ways of working with each other, but just also the world we live in is more complex and more challenging perhaps than ever before. And so the competencies associated with emotional intelligence are absolutely critical.
It's interesting that Harvard study shared that 71% of employers value emotional intelligence over IQ reporting. And that employees with high levels of who report high levels of emotional intelligence are more likely to stay calm under pressure, resolve conflict effectively, and respond to coworkers with empathy. So it's everything that you just said is supported in this research. If we think about the flip side of emotional intelligence, or the low emotional intelligence, that's described as signs showing up of people getting upset easily, or feeling misunderstood, or becoming overwhelmed by emotions, or maybe not being assertive. What do you see as the risks to leaders who lack emotional intelligence?
Well, I think it's important, and I'll answer the question certainly, but I think it's one way to answer that question is to think about how we're going to frame emotional intelligence. What exactly does that mean? Because it's sort of a nebulous term. So the framework that I like to use when I'm teaching it to clients consists of 4 categories or buckets, if you will. Self-awareness, which is the extent to which we are aware of our emotional state from moment to moment to moment. And if you want to broaden that notion, having a clear understanding of what makes us tick, of who we are, of what makes us the person we are, our strengths, our weaknesses, our vulnerabilities, et cetera. That's self-awareness. The second bucket is self-management or self-regulation. That's our ability primarily to stay calm under pressure and navigate through stressful moments appropriately. The third bucket is social awareness, which is our ability to demonstrate or exhibit empathy, the idea of putting ourselves in the shoes of another person and seeing the issue or problem through their eyes, if I can mix metaphors, shoes and eyes, right? But you get it, right? And then the fourth is relationship management, which has everything to do with the skills necessary, as you said in your introduction, to build strong, trusting relationships. Now, I think we can turn our attention to the question of what are some of the pitfalls of people who lack emotional intelligence. So if they lack self-awareness, they really are oblivious as to the way they are showing up in meetings, in various interactions. They may feel that they are being very effective in particular interactions. And then after they leave the room, everyone turns to each other and says, "What was that all about?" Or he or she just made it 10 times worse. Mm-hmm. There's a kind of a comical concept called the seagull management or seagull leadership, where the manager flies in, poops all over everybody, and flies out, and leaves everybody to clean up the mess, right? That would be an example of someone with low self-awareness, just a naivety and an obliviousness about how they are comporting themselves and conducting themselves. If they have low self-management or self-regulation skills, that was a bucket number 2, then they lack the skills to deal with pressure and stress effectively. They may have outbursts of anger, frustration, fury. They're unable to deal with the unexpected in a way that we would describe, a mature adult should be able to do. They act like an infant, not getting what they want in the toy store. If they are low in social awareness, that means they have a difficult time exhibiting empathy for other people. So they may show narcissistic traits. they may say, well, too bad. You need to make it happen. You need to find a way to make it happen, without really taking the time or expending the energy to understand what what the other person is truly facing in terms of an issue, a problem, or a challenge. That doesn't mean they necessarily need to agree with the other person's perspective, but it does mean they need to at least acknowledge the validity of the other person's opinion. So leaders low in empathy or social awareness are usually seen as cold, aloof, and almost borderline sociopathic. And if they're low in relationship management, they lack the skills to build trusting relationships. They may be undependable. They may be unreliable. They may be erratic in their behavior. And one day they come in and they're nice and cordial and pleasant. And the next day they're, just a raving monstrosity, and people just don't know who they're going to get. So when we talk about being low in emotional intelligence, that can mean a lot of things. Sometimes it's a combination of things. The bottom line, though, is that any lack of emotional intelligence in any of these areas is going to, I think, severely compromise your ability to be an effective leader or manager, or if you're not in a position of formal leadership, just an effective human being, an effective colleague, an effective peer, an effective coworker. So yes, all of these things can be learned. All of these things can be practiced, but it does take dedication and commitment and a desire to get better.
You just made me think of a past experience, and this is going back many, many years, long before my work with Exude Human Capital. And I remember a group that I worked with had a particular department head, and the running joke in that department was, well, what coat is he wearing today? And I remember hearing this. I'm like, what do you mean, what coat? And they said, oh, if it's the winter jacket, things are frosty, don't go near him.
Right.
If it's a light windbreaker, you're probably okay, but watch what you say. And I think that was really what they were describing, is someone who was low on emotional intelligence.
Yeah, and it's funny that they were able to associate, a visual cue like outerwear, with the person's mood or attitude, and that's something that I've heard as well. And yes, a lot of teams sort of covertly have these little inside jokes about people, which can be a lot of fun. But it's not. I'll tell you, it's not a lot of fun to work for one of these individuals, because it can really create a toxic environment. And it's a bit of a cliche to say that people don't leave companies; they leave bosses, or they leave managers. We've all heard that before, but it's probably a cliche for a reason. I mean, there's probably a great deal of truth to that. And I think some people who otherwise enjoy their work cannot tolerate a toxic leader who's low in emotional intelligence, and unfortunately, they see no other course of action but to leave. And that's when you see these mass exoduses from teams and organizations, and some leaders scratch their head and wonder why, without realizing that they are, in fact, the primary cause of it. I see that quite a bit.
Yeah, I would agree. I see that as well. And you'll often see it kind of in the package of, but he or she is such a great salesperson, or such a great account manager, or such a great this. So maybe that's just, maybe don't worry about it too much. But to your point, it sounds like it can really have a devastating impact on a team or an organization.
Oh, for sure. I remember. I mean, I could provide many examples of being sort of called in or summoned by a client to fix in quotes, fix a team. Mike, can you fix my team? And the more I find out, the more I realize is that the team's okay. It's the manager that is really the primary issue, and it never occurred to the manager that he or she may be a part of the problem, or maybe in some cases the totality of the problem. I was doing some work for a group of nurses at a hospital in Philadelphia many years ago, and I was doing a workshop on, I forget what it was, but it was something about teamwork. And one of the nurses stopped me about 30 to 45 minutes into my program and said, Mike, this is great. I'm enjoying this class very much. It makes a lot of sense, but I have to tell you, we're not the problem. And I said, okay, tell me more. She said, yeah, I mean, our nurse manager is a tyrant. She's the problem. She's the issue. And of course, she wasn't in the room because, right, because managers tell their teams to go to these development programs, but they often don't attend themselves. But what was enlightening about that is the more I learned from the assembled nurses, I started to learn more about their nurse manager and how difficult she was making it for these folks to do their job. And I had the unenviable task of having to go back to that nurse manager who was the person that hired me, right? That was the person who hired me to come in and fix the team. Yeah. So I had to deliver some diplomatic feedback and say, I have some things to share with you, which may be a little uncomfortable. Are you willing to hear them? And what she did with my feedback, I have no idea afterwards. But yes, this is what I'm talking about in terms of self-awareness. And I think a self-aware manager might have asked me in that moment, without telling me specifics, was there anything said about how I might do a better job as manager of this team? Was any feedback or any recommendations given to you to pass along to me that I can learn from? See, for me, that would be the hallmark of an emotionally intelligent manager. I don't recall this particular manager asking me that question, which was sort of telling.
Well, we're going to hope that maybe as a result of the work you did, that person is thinking differently about it today.
Hopefully.
But for leaders, okay, so let's say you are a business owner, business leader, HR professional, or a leader in an organization, and you want to help other leaders, help yourself develop your emotional intelligence. What advice do you have? What can people do to become more emotionally intelligent?
Yeah, I guess that's the million-dollar question. If we agree that emotional intelligence is a thing, and we agree that it is something that can be, that the competencies or skills associated with it are things that can be strengthened and amplified through hard work, like going to the gym, right? These are skills that can be honed and strengthened. So if we buy in, I guess that's the first step. We need people need to agree that it's a thing and it's something that can be improved, and then they have to commit to wanting to improve. So there are things that we can do. There are exercises and activities that I do with my clients that may prove helpful for me to share with your audience, Allison, here. Now, I didn't come up with this little activity, but I saw it on the internet years ago when I was first learning this, and it's really kind of neat and it's fun. And I'll share it in about 30 seconds. So what I have people do if they want to increase their self-awareness is imagine a line from 0 to 100. And 0 is the most calm and most relaxed you can be. And 100 is the most stressed and anxious you can be. 50 is sort of the midpoint. And what I do is I literally go around the room and I ask everybody in the workshop to tell me what their number is right now as they're sitting here in this room. And you get 10 and 20, and sometimes you get things on the high end of the scale. You get 70 or 80, right? So after we go around the room, I stop and I say, is anyone able to sort of walk me through the process that you just did, the mental process that allowed you to land on that number? Because unless you just gave me a random number off the top of your head, you went through some sort of mental gymnastics to land on that number. And people say, well, here's kind of what I did. I went through all the stuff that's happening in my life, all the stuff that's happening in my professional life, my personal life, all the things I have to do today, all the work that's piling up as I sit here in your workshop, Mike, and I'm pretty anxious about all of it, so I'm an 80. Or somebody else says, I'm enjoying this. I don't have a lot going on. All of my projects are on time, so I'm about a 10 or a 20. I said, good. Here's what you need to do. Do that a few times a day. Have the discipline to stop periodically throughout the day and do this I call it an emotional scan. Like an airport scanner scans you for metal. This is an activity that scans your emotions. And what it does is it puts your subconscious emotions on your radar so that you now have a choice. If you say, I'm at a 10 or a 20, I'm feeling pretty good, I'm relaxed, I'm content, I'm not stressed, great. You can go about the rest of your day and be pretty productive. But if you realize, hey, I'm at a 70 or 80, I just had a really tense exchange with my boss. I'm an 85 right now. Well, you can choose to sit there and marinate in stress and anxiety, or you can take steps to mitigate that 85 or that 90 so that you can put yourself in a more productive and constructive mental state. But of course, it starts first with awareness. You have to be aware of how you're feeling so that you then have choices regarding what to do with those emotions. As long as those emotions are sort of percolating under the surface and you're unaware of them, they are in control of you rather than you being in control of them. So this is a little activity, a little exercises that folks can do. I say do it in the morning, do it in the afternoon, do it in the evening. Just take 5 or 10 seconds and stop and say, where am I right now? I'm at a 20, I'm at a 30. Okay, I'm okay. No worries. I'm at an 80 or a 90. I'm super stressed. I'm super anxious. I'm super frustrated. Okay, what can I do to get myself into a more productive state? And that's where the next activity comes in, right? That's where we check our impulse to lash out, to react in an aggressive way. Because when we're feeling stressed and anxious and frustrated and irritated, we're usually not at our best. And so it's at this point where we have to really be cautious. And so if we are aware that we're at the high end of that continuum, we now have a choice. And the choice we make is, I'm going to take steps to bring that number down. And the number one thing that I tell people to do is pause. And that sounds super easy and super simple. It's not. How many times have we wished that we had just taken a few moments to pause before we said or did something in a state of agitation or frustration or anger that moments later we regretted? If we had just had the emotional intelligence to pause and allow our thinking brain to catch up with our emotional brain, we might have been able to move through that moment more thoughtfully and more constructively. And so what I would say is, if we want to start strengthening our emotional intelligence, start there. Start by becoming more aware of how we're feeling from moment to moment to moment, especially when we are stressed and anxious and frustrated, and then practice the pause. Don't give in to that impulse to say that thing or do that thing that you're going to regret. Take a few moments to breathe, pause, move through the moment, and respond in a more thoughtful and constructive way. And I guarantee that that will save you a lot of heartache and a lot of bitterness and a lot of apology making down the road. And I would start there. As far as strengthening your empathy, that's a little bit more challenging. And we could debate whether you're born with empathy or not. But I would just say to people, demonstrate compassion, understand that other people's truth may not be their own, doesn't make them wrong. It just means they have a different perspective from you. Try to honor that perspective and look for the truth in that perspective. And, you know, look, that's a much longer conversation, but I think we as a society really need to work on that together. We are really not good at exhibiting empathy, compassion, and a respect for others' perspectives. And it's something that I think we all need to work on, frankly. It's a very long answer to your question, but the good news is there are ways to improve your EI.
You know, you just made me think of something from my past again. What I used to do quite a bit of facilitation, and there was a course I used to teach around empathy, and this was in person, and we would do role play, and I would set it up and say, okay, you know, we talked about stating facts and feelings and acknowledging how someone's feeling to show you empathize with them. And now, right, we're going to give you a scenario, a role play. We want you to make a statement of empathy. 99% of the time, people couldn't do it. They could think it, but they couldn't actually make a statement of empathy. And I think you're right. I think you're right. This is a societal issue, and maybe it's a cultural issue that we're not very good at expressing empathy.
I'm sorry, Allison. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I was speaking with an HR professional earlier who indicated that they're spending quite a bit of time now in medical schools teaching young medical professionals the concepts around empathy and how it can actually help in the healing process of their patients. To slow down a little bit, like you said, slow down a little bit, demonstrate some empathy before you actually, start telling them what's happening or what needs to be done, et cetera.
Yeah, it's gratifying to hear that. I mean, I think historically, the notion that empathy would be taught or would even come up in a traditional medical school setting was unheard of. So if it is starting to be sort of baked into the curriculum at medical schools, I think that's a wonderful thing. Certainly any profession where you're dealing with people in pain or people in need, whether it's attorneys or clinicians or physicians, or I think you mentioned earlier in our conversation about hospitality. I don't remember if we were recording at the time or not when you mentioned that. But yes, any customer-facing job, which is virtually all of them, right? Whether it's internal customers or external customers, I think empathy, and it's important to point out that empathy is not agreeing with someone or feeling badly for someone. I mean, sympathy is feeling bad. I'm sorry that happened. You go and you see all the sympathy cards at your local drugstore, right? These are cards that express, I feel badly that this bad thing happened. For me, empathy is simply trying to or striving to recognize or understand the situation, the problem, the challenge, the issue through the eyes of the other person. It does not mean you necessarily agree with them. It means you acknowledge the validity of their point of view, which may differ from yours. And it is at that point where conflict can be resolved. As long as I am entrenched in my point of view and you are entrenched in your point of view, and we are failing to see each other's truth, we are going to be embattled. And you could point to any war, any battle, any business conflict, typically as one of entrenched positions and an unwillingness to acknowledge the validity of an alternative perspective. And so what I do in my webinars, my webinars, my workshops, my programs, etc., is practice demonstrating empathy. And for me, it starts with habit number 5 from The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. I know a lot of people have read it. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. Mm-hmm. And what he does is he flips the traditional way we have of communicating, which is we try to shower everybody with our point of view and our perspective, and they try to shower us with their point of view and their perspective. And here we go round and round and round. If you follow habit number 5 and seek first to understand what? Understand whom? The other person. Where are they coming from? Where's their pain point? What are they struggling with? What are they grappling with? Then to be understood. I understand, Allison. I hear you. I understand you. I recognize your truth. May I share my truth with you now? And together we reach a point of mutual understanding and respect and appreciation. For me, I know a lot of that sounds very highfalutin, and maybe someone's thinking, Mike, you sound like an idealist. Maybe I am. But I look around me and I just think, wow, we can just do better. This is not something that we're all that good at. I know we can do better as a society, as a country, as a people, as a nation. And maybe I am an idealist, but I see a tremendous opportunity for all of us to practice empathy and compassion with each other. And so I try to do that in my own practice, in my own life with my loved ones, my family, my friends, my colleagues, my clients, as much as possible. And it makes a huge difference.
I can't agree with you more. I think that that's a really important uh, an important message for everyone. I you mentioned earlier that today's workplace is you didn't use the word contentious, but it is a little bit more volatile than perhaps we have experienced in many years, on a consistent basis, right? There's so much happening externally. Organizations are changing at rapid speed, and constant change is always somewhat disruptive to people, some more so than others, and that can create insecurity and uncertainty and frustration and conflict, right? Now that we're in this hybrid world, virtual world, how can a leader apply emotional intelligence when I'm not standing in front of you, when I'm not seeing you every day or maybe every month?
Sure.
What do you recommend?
Yeah. It's a great question. In fact, I have a number of clients I'm working with now who have moved into a virtual or hybrid arrangement and are struggling with this very issue. So it's very timely and very relevant. And what I would say is that the tools that one might use to increase or strengthen emotional intelligence are not that dissimilar to the tools that one would use in a virtual or hybrid space. But what I would say is that everything now is in sharper relief. So while the tools may not be significantly different, we need to be focused on the tools and using the tools and more aware of the tools and more willing to use the tools in this space than perhaps we were previously. So what does that mean? That means we have to be extra self-aware. We have to be extra self-aware of how we are coming across to people who may not be in the same room. That is tricky to do on Zoom or Microsoft Teams because we lack the physical presence of the person sitting in front of us where we can perhaps read and interpret social cues coming back. Right now, I just see your lovely face from your neck up, Allison, and I see your facial expressions and things like that. But the rest of your body, I don't see. I don't see your posture. I don't see your body language. I don't see your hand gestures, all the things that I might use to make meaning of our conversation. So I need to be extra tuned in to what you're saying, what you're not saying. I need to be extra tuned into how I'm coming across. Am I coming in too hot? Am I coming in too cold? That's sort of like the Goldilocks story, right? Am I meeting you where you need to be met so that we have a productive and fruitful conversation? I certainly have to be more understanding in this environment of things that may come up suddenly, unexpectedly. Somebody is running late. Somebody has a crying baby in the background. Somebody has a dog barking. Somebody has to leave a meeting early. I mean, if you don't have social awareness and self-regulation skills in this business environment, you better start strengthening them because it will compromise your effectiveness. We have to be much more understanding and just much more flexible, adaptable. I think also in terms of relationship management, we have to be extra cautious to do what we say and say what we do, to be dependable, to under promise and over deliver, to support one another. A lot of managers are a little squirrely when, it's just not their comfort zone. Mm-hmm. So I say, hey, you need to be in more, greater communication with your team than maybe you're accustomed to being. And I don't mean checking up on people. I mean checking in with people. There's a difference. I'm not calling you and saying, Allison, did you finish this? Where are you with this? Where are you with that? I'm saying, how are you doing? Mm-hmm. What are you working on today? How can I support you? What can I provide for you in terms of resources to help you be successful today? It's those kinds of conversations And you know what? If you're a manager and you're not accustomed to having those conversations, I don't know what to tell you, but you better lean into that space, because that's where, in this business environment, that's where a lot of your success is going to depend. Now, you don't have to suddenly turn into Mother Teresa or Gandhi. You don't have to be the most empathic person who ever lived. But these are areas, and that's where sort of a self-check can come in. What are the areas where I'm strong, and where are those areas where maybe I need to amp it up a little bit, and step out of my comfort zone and maybe work on it a little bit. Which is why I say it takes us back to square one. You need to be willing to do that reflective work. And not only that, commit to making the changes that may be necessary. So it's one thing to say, yeah, I really should do better in this, or I really should, do better in that, and then, not do anything to make the change. So this does require a little bit of courage, but it is absolutely, essential, particularly because we lack many of the mechanisms and avenues that we would typically have for interacting and being with one another. So we have to be extra cautious and extra astute.
And I may have shared this on a previous podcast, but I think it's relevant. When I was commuting in and out of the city, and I still do this now at the end of my day, but I would attempt to practice self-awareness as I left the city, to say, okay, what's one thing I did to add value to a relationship today?
Love that.
And what's one thing I could have done more of, less of, or differently to get a better outcome?
Love that.
And so for all our listeners out there, try that as that first step in self-awareness. And Michael, I just want to thank you so much for taking time out of what I know is a very busy schedule to chat with me today. For everyone listening, Michael Brenner of the Right Chord Leadership, we thank you so much. And for all our listeners, I want to leave you with a final thought. And this thought is a quote by Marshall Rosenberg, who's an American psychologist, author, mediator, who was known for nonviolent communication. And not that that's the topic of today's podcast, but I think the quote is relevant. And the quote is, "We are dangerous when we're not conscious of our responsibility for how we behave, think, or feel." And on that note, Perfect. Thank you to all our listeners. Thank you to Michael Brenner. And this is Hold On, Let Me Close My Door. Until next time.